It's the SWP Disciple checking in. So we just had a crazy cloudburst. You can see the rain and everything. Like a torrential downpour just a moment ago. But then people are starting to come back out. I mean, it's a little later now. It's like dusk. It's like probably, I don't know, 8:20 or so. So I don't know how many people are going to be out, but I'm at the park getting my laps in. Just had an impromptu meeting with some friends at the Vietnamese restaurant right near my house. They came down from Northampton. Of course, they told me like last moment, like, we're about to walk in, come through. And I was like out running errands and stuff. So, but we were still able to get like a good hour together once I got done. In part because I was gonna go get some shots up and the gym was closed. So, you know, I went to the gym prior just for cardio, but so much for some, you know, little shooting session. But it was nice. It was really nice. My boy's birthday is tomorrow. He'll be 48. Dang, we're getting up there. But because of when it falls, usually we go to like a Korean barbecue spot down in New Britain, Connecticut. But this year, I think they're just doing something quaint. They just came back from the lake, from his wife's parents' lake house, and I guess they kind of celebrated that way this weekend. But this was like our little intimate birthday lunch or whatever. And yeah, I always have a great time chilling with my boy and his wife, just catching up. And the topic ended up being, of course, it, you know, steered to politics, and we all kind of agreed that we don't really like the progressive left. Not because we don't necessarily agree with some of the things that they say, but the message, you know, obviously it kind of like in a lot of ways made the message too extreme, and thus gave the election to the other side. See somebody getting a little baseball work in over there. I seen him like kind of working on his pitching throw. But yeah, so we talked about that. Basically what it centered on was the new, you know, podcast bro, you know, red pill culture, if you will. So much so, like, you know, my boy's wife, she's you know, of the demographic that would be like the last to be aware of it, but now it's, you know, it's kind of gone mainstream. And, you know, as we know with the 2024 election, it very much swung things, and the, you know, the left's reluctance to really, like in terms of like the leadership and the big players, to really appear on the on, you know, red pill podcast or red pill adjacent podcasts. It basically seeded that, like some of that young core vote, particularly young men. You know, a lot of them went right. We'll see what happens with this administration. Pendulum's probably about to swing back for midterms and then for the 2028 election, but we'll see what happens. But you're probably wondering, like, why talk about this on like what's kind of like a birthday celebration or whatever. So we have a friend. It's really my boy's wife's friend that she went to prep school with and stuff. And I've known him as long as I've known hers, which is to say over 10 years. And he used to be this really, you know, cool, affable cat. Even though, you know, as I'm hearing more stories, I guess the remnants of the susceptibility to cult-like think and all that has, I guess, always been there. But apparently he's kind of fallen into like the 4chan Stormwatch type set, which is weird. It makes me wonder what he thinks about me, because we've been in each other's company quite a bit. And then it's weird because it's like antithetical, because his wife is like a womanist or a feminist, which I guess are kind of like different things. I don't know how that works. I've always wondered, like, you know, is it James Carville? He's like the famous Democratic strategist, and his wife is Republican. It makes me wonder how that works. I would think in theory I could be married to a woman who's like conservative, but I guess it just depends along like on what lines, like what is she conservative about, right? So a big part of the issue with the left and right now, it used to be pretty much just about like, you know, taxing and spending and like, you know, austerity measures, things like that or whatever. But now it's like stared into like, you know, obviously like the Christian right and then to vaccinate or not to vaccinate, and a bunch of other stuff, and like, a lot of like well-established facts that are now being like challenged, and like now we can't really agree on a lot of very like objective truths and stuff, which it's hard to have a discourse or to further a discussion if you can't agree on some basic things. I don't know how much of this is like an outgrowth of the old Tea Party or Trumpism, which they kind of morphed into each other, or what. And I know that like, in terms of like the red pill, I used to be kind of red pill, but like not in terms of like the politics, but just in terms of like the discourse between men and women, which I still have issues with, I still have misgivings about, but it provided a vehicle, for the merger of like politics and then like interpersonal relationships. As much as people like to kind of poo-poo like dating and it's frivolous and there's more important things in the world, an easy way to make someone's life very uncomfortable is if they have no prospect of meeting anyone and no prospect of having a family, as it were, and things like that. I remember hearing that on was it Call Me Shapes channel, which has been kind of like blowing up lately. He's like the new red pill, I don't want to say hotness or whatever. I don't really agree with a lot of what he says, but some of it obviously is steeped in some, I guess, like cogent opinion or whatever. And I can't remember if it was his or no, you know what? It was Chisha Zed's channel. Because basically what's happened is, obviously women make their own money, blah, blah, blah. I'm all for it. I'm a male feminist. You already know that in a lot of ways. And I'm all about women's like autonomy and being able to kind of be self-deterministic. And I mean, no one can control their own destiny, but like, to the extent that you think you can. My whole thing is like, as long as the, you own the consequences, for better or for worse. That's usually like, a fork in the road. But a big issue with the dating, and obviously the pushback is a lot of these men, they're blaming it on feminism, and now they're, voting, even if it's against their own interests, they're voting right wing. And, here we are. This is why we have Trump and, among a bunch of other things. But what he said, which was like a really good point, is the taste of a lot of women, if they can't get what they want, and I know this intimately, they'd rather just kind of have nothing. But of course, no person's an island. And if you have enough people, especially those who are the ones that are going to like carry the child or whatever, if they're like, I'd rather go without, or just kind of be, out in the ether, as opposed to joining with, whatever guy's in their purview or in their main orbit. Because Kendra G, who I don't really agree with, but she did make a good point that your real choice in terms of, person you can be with is the person that's in your face, not like a hypothetical or theoretical person that you think you deserve or whatever, or someone that's maybe, X amount of towns or states over, and you're like, man, if I were just in their orbit or their ecosystem, if they just saw me, we would get together, whatever. It's the person that's in your face who's actually making like, a play for you right there, live and in color, that I agree with. So for, a lot of women, they're just kind of almost like opting out in a sense. And then which is leading to a lot of guys like really opting out, where they're just like, they're not going out. They're, not spending their money the same, right? We know a lot of like David's Bridal, like a lot of things associated with like, with marriage, weddings and marriage. A lot of those businesses are shuttering because guys are just kind of stepping away. And obviously more and more men becoming like, passport bros or whatever, but that only stretches so far, right? So that only has a certain amount of range. A lot of men don't have a passport, and B, who really has the wherewithal of like trying to bring someone over here, marry him, all that or whatever. Most people, you just kind of, you want what's within your culture, the Western culture as we are right now. You don't necessarily like, now I have people close to me who've done it, but they've always been kind of like other, like, not every person requires this deep like coalescing of culture and deep conversation, and like, you know, you're into the same things and all that. So some people, they just kind of, I don't want to say it like this, but like, you know, they're fine with like, you know, a warm body. There's someone who's actually, they're in a relationship, they're going to stay there for whatever reason it is, whether it's like, you know, financial, or they just kind of, you know, believe in like the basics of marriage. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like, oh yeah, you know, I remember this, you know, this old Wu-Tang song from like 1997, and that's my jam too, or whatever. And you're just like connecting on this like really, that's really more of like a romanticized like Western Disney type of view of what relationships and marriage is. And don't get me wrong, I'm kind of the same way. I'd love it if, you know, I make like a Martin joke or whatever, you know, Gina, and the person I'm with, they just get it, and you know, we have a good laugh about it or whatever. But for a lot of people, you know, working at the optical shop, I see it all the time, where they're just kind of like, you know, we come together, merge resources or whatever, raise these kids, and then we ensure that each other's not alone, you know. But anyway, I'm rambling on my third lap right now. I'll probably do 2 more. The Lord is faithful. Stay with me. God bless.